Hey everybody, I'm Dee, and this is my feline life mate Stud. Welcome back to the Gen X Files, or welcome if you're new. In this video, we're going to take a deep dive into the life of Sante Kimes, one of America's most notorious female criminals, and calling her a criminal would be putting it mildly. From arson to fraud to much, much worse, Shante's criminal career spanned decades, with a trail of victims left in her wake. Watch as we uncover the shocking details of her life, her nutsy cuckoo relationship with her son Kenneth Kimes Jr., and the infamous crimes that landed them both in prison. This true crime story will leave you astonished at how far greed and deception can drive a person. Born Sandra Louise Singers on July 24, 1934, in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, Sante Kimes seemed destined for a life far removed from the spotlight of crime. She grew up in a turbulent environment. When Sante was just 3 years old, her father left his wife Mary and their 4 children, where Shante's mother thought it would be a smart idea to pimp herself out in order to support her young family. This action resulted in Sante being assaulted as a child, if you know what I mean, and as an estranged sister tells it, also included an ongoing inappropriate relationship with her older brother. To say Shante's childhood was chaotic would be an understatement. In an attempt at a better life, Sante, her sister, and her mom moved to Los Angeles, California when Sante was a teenager. Where the other 2 kids were, I'm not sure, but it's possible they had already been placed in foster care on account of Mary's chosen profession, if you catch my drift. Sante was adopted by Edwin and Mary Chambers, along with a younger boy named Howard. Sante and her new family then moved to Carson City, Nevada, where Shante's name was changed from Sandra Singers to Sandy Chambers. It didn't take long for Sante to be repeatedly assaulted, again, this time by Edwin. In 1952, despite her tumultuous home life, Sante graduated high school and shortly afterwards moved to Sacramento, California with her bestie, Ruth. Between 1952 and 1955, Sante and Ruth moved to Los Angeles, to Sacramento, to San Francisco, to finally Santa Barbara, where Sante opened a store credit card in Ruth's brother's name, racked up $400 in charges, and quickly vamoosed it into the night. In 1955, at the age of 21, Sante met and married Army officer Lee Powers. Sante told Lee she was pregnant, but she wasn't. 2 years later, she left Lee because he had aspirations to become a school teacher, and his wife, well, a housewife. Sante wasn't having any of it. A short time after leaving Lee, and by short I mean months, she rekindled her high school romance with her then on-again, off-again boyfriend, Ed Walker. Ed was a contractor and built homes in the Sacramento area. They married in 1957 and had 1 son, Kent. I'm not sure if Sante liked the homes Ed had built her very much. In 1960, in addition to changing her name from Sante to Shanty, she somehow managed to set fire to her kitchen, resulting in a $10,000 insurance payout for the property damage. Between 1957 and 1967, several of the homes Ed helped build in the area fell victim to arson. Perhaps Sante didn't like any of the homes Ed built. When Sante wasn't setting fire to Ed's new builds, she was busy getting jiggy with his wealthy business associates, and shoplifting, and trying to collect insurance money for non-existent property damage. In 1964, Sante managed to rack up $20,000 in credit card debt. That's over $203,000 in today's money. The problem, aside from not being able or willing to pay the money back, many of the accounts were issued to Sante under aliases. The cops caught on to her scam and arrested her on 17 counts of grand theft. Just 3 years later, in 1967, I was born. Ed and Shanty divorced, but not before one last FU to Ed. In late 1966, Shanty and her boyfriend Clyde, because of course his name is Clyde, burned the upper half of Ed's Laurel Canyon house, which Ed had given her as a gift to, say it with me, collect the insurance money. Mom of the Year Shanty spent most of the next 2 years hopping from place to place with her son Kent. At just 10 years old, Shanty enlisted his help breaking and entering into various homes, stealing things for her. During her downtime, she read Millionaire magazine, where she eye-spied with her little eye one Kenneth Kimes, a motel chain owner and land developer whose net worth was approximately $20 million, or $115 million in today's money. However, as Shanty recalled it, I met him because I didn't have a dime to my name. She went into a motel to use a payphone which only took dimes, and she only had $100 bills on her. Kenneth Kimes saw her and let her use his office phone. I'm not sure how any of this makes sense, but regardless, Sante swooped in on Ken and using her Elizabeth Taylor-esque looks, charm, and charisma, managed to sink her meat hooks right into him. But it's no fairy tale ending living happily ever after for Sante and Kent. Even though they were living a life of luxury with Ken, Sante couldn't help but continue her scheming, scamming ways. And to be honest, I think Ken kind of got off on it, if not encouraging her. Between 1972 and 1974, Ken and Sante Kimes tried to profit from the American bicentennial through a project called the Forum of Man, which involved selling giant posters of state flags commemorating the 200th birthday of the United States. They believed that by mingling with the right people in Washington and using clever marketing, the government would purchase these posters for every classroom in America. Ken, needing credibility, began giving patriotic speeches and declared himself the honorary bicentennial ambassador, even claiming he would spread the news of the celebration worldwide. To gain legitimacy, one of these two numbnuts forged a memo on White House stationery to secure a meeting with First Lady Pat Nixon, but Mrs. Nixon saw through their act. Still, they managed to snap a photo with her, which they used to arrange meetings with other officials. In February 1974, Ken and Sante crashed several high-profile Washington events, including a reception for Vice President Gerald Ford and dinners at various embassies. Sante, flaunting fake diamonds and inventing wild stories about her heritage, even made a pitch for their flag posters. However, their boldness attracted attention, and soon Washington newspapers exposed their con, revealing the forged letter used to meet Pat Nixon. Their attempt to capitalize on the bicentennial ended in embarrassment, though Sante maintained that they were simply trying to, get rid of cynicism in the world. Although intimately involved with a millionaire, Sante couldn't keep her sticky fingers clean. In September 1974, she was arrested for shoplifting in Newport Beach, though I'm not sure what or how much she attempted to steal. But lucky for her, she got away with just a $250 fine and 2 years probation, because Sante was 3 months pregnant. On March 24, 1975, Sante gave birth to a son she named Kenneth Kimes Jr. I guess Sante was feeling a bit overwhelmed by being a well-to-do mom of two, because in June of that same year, she took Kent, who was now about 13, to Ken's nephew's house for a couple of hours, which ultimately turned into about a month. Later that year, the Kimes collection moved to Honolulu, Hawaii, where Sante promptly burned down the family home. Even though fire officials ruled it arson, insurance still paid on the claim. But their home wasn't the only thing that went up in flames while in Hawaii. Shante's relationships did too. Kent ran away several times to live with his father Ed, who was finally able to gain custody of his son. And unwilling to put up with any more shenanigans from Sante, Ken left too. But like a phoenix rising from the ashes, Sante used that charm and charisma to convince Ken to return to her, which he did. And Ken, Sante, and Kenny Jr. relocated once again, this time to Las Vegas, Nevada. Sante wanted a fresh start. In 1979, Sante upped the ante by not paying their live-in staff, even though they could afford it. Hiring illegal immigrants from Mexico, remember it's the 70s, Sante and Kenneth would offer them housing and employment, then kept them as virtual prisoners by threatening to have them deported if they did not follow Shante's orders. Kenny Jr.'s tutor, who spent most days at the house, was instructed not to allow their staff to use the phone, answer the door, or set foot outside. In the meantime, Ken and Sante finally wed in Nevada in 1981. In 1985, the FBI stormed the family's rental home in La Jolla, California, and arrested Sante and Ken on 17 charges of involuntary servitude and transporting illegal aliens. How did they find out? Older son Kent ratted the Kimeses out to authorities. Though prosecutors let Ken Sr. plead guilty to a lesser charge and pay a $70,000 fine, Sante wasn't getting off that easy. They took her to trial. Several maids and Ken Jr.'s tutor testified that Sante had burned one maid with a hot iron, scalded another in a shower, and locked yet another in a closet for hours. What the fuck, you absolute wackadoodle. "She hit me because I burned the hamburger bread," said Dolores Vasquez. "She threatened me with a pistol. She called me stupid." I guess I shouldn't be surprised. In addition to thievery, insurance fraud, and running scams, Shanty had been violent in the past. About 10 years earlier, Shanty smashed her ex-husband Ed's window and attacked him, looking for his new girlfriend. A few weeks later, Shanty attacked Ed's girlfriend in a parking lot, dragging her around by her hair. And a bit after that, her and Clyde had shot blanks at Ed because, quote, he turned on them. Not sure what that means exactly, but that's what's been reported. It's also been reported that in 1980, Shanty stole a mink coat from a woman named Catherine Kenworthy, who had draped her mink over a chair in the Mayflower's Town and Country Lounge, a hotel where the Kimeses were staying. While Ken Sr. distracted her with conversation, Shanty took the coat and slipped it on. When Kenworthy reported the coat stolen, a witness gave the description of a fat Liz Taylor to both the police and the hotel staff, who figured out it was Shanty. When the police showed up at the door to their suite, they found the coat, along with several others, including a men's topcoat. All identifying marks such as labels and monograms had been removed. Shanty was charged with the theft of the fur coat, Ken with the men's coat. The two hastily posted a $4,000 bond and got the hell out of Dodge. Over the next 5 years, Shanty managed to delay her trial time and time again by using and reusing the same old ruse. She'd have mysterious doctors from Mexico send letters to the court right before each trial date, claiming she was either too sick to travel or about to undergo surgery. Meanwhile, Ken caught a lucky break when the owner of the top coat involved in his case passed away, leading to the charges against him being dropped. Finally, in 1985, Shanty was brought to trial, but just as the jury was wrapping up their deliberations, she skipped town again. The jury convicted her in her absence. She was sentenced to 3 to 9 years in prison. However, a few days after sentencing, another phony letter was sent to the court. This time, it said that Shanty had been hit by a car while crossing the street just before the verdict, and that she had flown home to get treatment. Her lawyer then argued that it was illegal to convict someone who wasn't present at their trial, and unbelievably, it worked. Shanty won on appeal. It's been reported that around this time, Shanty hired a hitman to take out an associate of hers, allegedly because he would not participate in one of her real estate scams. While she was arrested on grand larceny charges for stealing the mink, I can't find any proof of the hitman allegation or what became of it. But at this point, though, would you be surprised to hear she actually hired a hitman? Because I wouldn't. The mid-1980s were a wild time for the Kimeses. In 1985, Shanty somehow managed to escape from jail while being held on the slavery charges. You would think a fat Liz Taylor-looking middle-aged woman wearing prison blues and making a run for it while being held on slavery charges would make national headlines, but unfortunately, I can't find any further details on this event, like where she went, how long she was out, and where she was picked up. It might be out there, but I just can't find it. In any event, in 1986, Shanty was convicted of 14 counts of slaveholding, escaping from prison, and transporting illegal aliens. Remember, Ken took a plea deal and was out. Actually, he went to treatment for alcoholism and led a relatively quiet life with his son Ken. Shanty, on the other hand, was sentenced to 5 years in a high-security prison in Kentucky. In December of 1989, she was released from prison. She quickly ran up a $10,000 credit card debt before anyone even knew she was out. Those new clothes, hair, and nails weren't going to pay for themselves, you know. Less than a year later, in September of 1990, Sante Kimes hired a lawyer named Elmer Ambrose Holmgren to set fire to her Honolulu home. She was facing a lien on the property, and selling it would have cost her about $900,000 at the time, or more than $2 million in today's money. One night, drunk on vodka, he regaled fascinated bar patrons the story of his arson, and eventually the feds, who had caught wind of his monkey business. Holmgren admitted he was involved in the arson at the behest of good old Shanty. On October 24th, Shanty sent a message to Holmgren by burning down his office. Well, that and it held incriminating evidence against her that in no way, shape, or form was making it to life if Shanty had anything to say about it. I guess Holmgren didn't get the memo because in August 1991, before the arson trial began, Elmer Holmgren agreed to vacation with Shanty and Ken Sr. in Costa Rica. Ken and Shanty made it back to the States just fine, but Elmer didn't. That was the last anyone ever saw of him. Years later, in 2000, Shanty's son, Kenneth Jr., came forward and admitted that his mother had confessed to him that she killed Holmgren. According to Kenneth Jr., Shanty hit Holmgren in the head with a hammer while she sat in the back seat of a vehicle, and he in the front. No charges were ever filed against Shanty or her family for his disappearance, or his murder. In 1994, with Kenny enrolled at UC Santa Barbara, Shanty and Ken Sr. moved nearby, where she often hosted keg parties with her son. It was this same year that Shanty would lose her partner in crime. Ken kicked the bucket while waiting in the car for Shanty to return from the bank. Some reports I've read say he died of a heart attack, others a brain aneurysm. Regardless, Kenny Jr. was on vacation when it happened. When Mommy Dearest picked him up from the airport, he asked, "Where's Papa?" To which she replied, "He's right here," and handed her son a shiny silver urn. He was mortified, of course, not just having been handed a bucket full of Dad, but also because he was never told of his passing, or had any input on his end-of-life arrangements. But he wasn't alone. Shanty didn't tell anyone Ken had passed. Kenny and Shanty boarded a flight right back to Honolulu, where they spread Ken's ashes across the Pacific Ocean. Although Shanty could provide a somewhat questionable marriage certificate, she couldn't produce a last will and testament that would leave her all of Ken's money. The last time his will was updated, he had left everything to his children. But that wouldn't stop Shanty from getting her mitts on as much of his $12 million fortune, or over $21 million in today's money, as she possibly could. Enter one of Ken's old real estate buddies, David Kasdan. Shanty started off by creating a whole slew of fake documents, making it look like Kasdan had purchased some of the Kimes' real estate. But Shanty got greedy. She wasn't satisfied with just faking real estate deals. Instead, using those fake docs, she took out second mortgages on the quote-unquote sold properties in Kasdan's name, resulting in Kasdan receiving a payment booklet from the bank. Shanty had put him on the hook for more than $200,000 worth of fraudulent loans. Naturally, Kasdan wasn't too happy about this. He threatened to expose everything. Unfortunately for him, Shanty didn't take too kindly to being threatened. On March 14, 1998, he was found shot to death in a dumpster at the Los Angeles airport. At this point, Kenny Jr. dropped out of college to join Mommy Dearest on the grift. In 1998, the duo began a cross-country journey that initially seemed pointless. In Utah, they quote-unquote purchased a new Lincoln Town Car valued at $14,400 with a worthless check right about the time David Kasdan was killed. And then they did the same with an RV in Alabama. Shanty and Kenny soon made their way to Florida to meet with banker Syed Bilal Ahmed. Syed Bilal Ahmed was a Bahraini officer at the First Cayman Bank in the Cayman Islands who had been in charge of Ken Sr.'s offshore bank accounts. Syed grew concerned when he noticed the large number of money transfers being requested and headed to the Bahamas to investigate. Shanty caught wind of Syed's raised eyebrows and decided she needed to handle the problem toot sweet. On September 4, 1996, Ken Jr. and Shanty went to dinner with Syed. Afterwards, they returned to her Cable Beach home for an after-dinner coffee, where they drugged him with roofies and drowned him in the bathtub. Afterward, Kenny disposed of his body in the sea. Syed's body was never discovered. While in Florida, Shanty had heard about a wealthy widowed socialite and former ballerina named Irene Silverman. 82-year-old Irene owned a large mansion on East 65th Street in New York City, which she had converted into apartments. In typical Shanty fashion, she came up with a scheme to swindle Miss Silverman. Swindle her out of her home, that is. And once again, she'd use her son as part of her con. Their plan? Kenny would pose as new single-tenant Manny Guarin, a Palm Beach web designer. He paid his $6,000 rent on apartment 1B in cash. Oddly, Manny's older, dark-haired assistant Eva seemed to spend a lot of awful time with Manny in apartment 1B, something Irene had taken note of. In fact, Irene had taken note of a lot, literally and figuratively. Her hinky meter must have been pinging because she kept notes on her new tenant, including his height, weight, and even a pencil sketch of what he looked like. During a July 4th party, Silverman told one of her assistants that she was going to serve Kenneth Kimes, Manny Guarin, an eviction notice. She never got the chance. Last seen on the morning of July 5th, Irene vanished, never to be seen again. Authorities believe Mommy and Clyde, a moniker given to the pair by the FBI, had devised a scheme whereby Shanti would assume the identity of Silverman and appropriate ownership of her mansion, which was valued at $7.7 million, equivalent to over $12.4 million in today's money. How she planned to do this without being noticed or suspected, at least physically, has me stumped, though it's been reported that Shanti was planning to tell the staff that her dear friend Irene had sold her the mansion and would show them a bill of sale if necessary. But before Shanti could put the wheels in motion, she, along with loving son Ken, were arrested for the theft of the Lincoln Town Car. The pair had no idea that the FBI had been tracking them and the stolen vehicle for months. While in custody, the NYPD ran a search on the duo and discovered that Mommy and Clyde were wanted in connection with a string of crimes across the country, including the theft of the RV, insurance fraud, and even murder. A search of the town car, still in their possession and located in a parking garage, uncovered a treasure trove of evidence against the pair, including, ready? $30,000 in cash, a power of attorney form with Silverman's forged signature, scream masks, wigs, zip ties, a loaded 9mm Glock, Silverman's keys, Silverman's passport, several cassettes of her tape-recorded calls, syringes, a bottle of flunitrazepam, 15 notebooks, walkie-talkies, and an empty stun gun box. In a black bag Shanti had checked at the Plaza Hotel that day, they also discovered a deed with Silverman's forged signature, transferring her mansion to one of Shanti's shell companies for $395,000. And on Kenny, they found Irene Silverman's Social Security card, her American Express card, a knife, and brass knuckles. When arrested for Irene's murder, they pled not guilty. The arrest took place after the FBI found an associate of the Kimeses, Stan Patterson, while investigating the pair. Stan confessed to selling a handgun to Kenny Jr., which was ultimately used to kill David Kasdan. "Lead us to her," they told Patterson, "and we won't prosecute you for selling guns illegally." In late June 1998, Shanti called Patterson about her plan to sell an expensive townhouse on New York's Upper West Side, want to guess whose? And asked for his help with the paperwork. Patterson agreed to meet with her at the New York Hilton on July 5th, cluing in the FBI well beforehand. As planned, Patterson met Shanti at the New York Hilton around 6 p.m. About an hour later, Kenneth Jr. showed up. That's when FBI agents and NYPD officers arrested the both of them, which made Kenny wet his pants. No, really, the scaredy cat can apparently murder old women but can't handle being arrested for it. On December 16, 1998, Shanti and Kenny were officially indicted on 84 counts, including charges such as robbery, grand larceny, burglary, and forgery, as well as the second-degree murder of Irene Silverman. But since Irene's body still hadn't been found, it was going to be a tough row to hoe for prosecutors, who'd have to make a case based only on circumstantial evidence. In the meantime, evidence had been mounting against the pair in the David Kasdan case. In August 1999, charges were filed against Shanti and Ken for the murder of David Kasdan. The Silverman trial kicked off on February 14, 2000, at the Manhattan Criminal Court. Prosecutors argued that Shanti didn't kill for money per se, but more out of a thrill-seeking, compulsive need. The defense, on the other hand, claimed the prosecutors couldn't prove murder because there was no physical evidence linking the Kimeses to Irene's suspected death. No DNA, no blood evidence, and of course, no body. Either way, discovery had to be nuts considering how deep Shanti's rabbit hole is. The jury did hear some dramatic testimony, including a recorded conversation between Shanti and Irene Silverman. Shanti had called Irene pretending to be from Circus in Las Vegas, telling Irene she had won a vacation. To claim the prize, she said, all Irene had to do was provide her Social Security number. After several months of testimony, the jury declared Shanti guilty on 58 different charges and Kenny 60. Shanti was sentenced to 120 years and Kenny 125. At their sentencing, Shanti was asked if she had anything to say. She jumped to her feet, where she ranted about her life and the unfairness of her trial for more than an hour. The judge stopped her. "Mrs. Kimes," he said, "your performance is over." Marshals led them both away. In October 2000, Kenneth Kimes got the bright idea to hold court TV reporter Maria Zone hostage. She had traveled to the Clinton Correctional Facility in upstate New York where Kenny was held to interview him, the second time since being convicted. This time, however, she got more than she bargained for. Kenneth pressed a ballpoint pen into her throat and demanded that his mother not be extradited to California, where the two faced the death penalty for the murder of David Kasdan. An officer observing the interview pushed an alarm and called for help. After 4 hours of negotiation, Kimes finally removed the pen from her throat, and negotiators were able to wrestle him to the ground. Whether or not he peed himself again is anyone's guess. In March 2001, Kenneth Kimes was extradited to California to face the music for his role in the murder of David Kasdan. In June 2001, Sante followed. 3 years later, in June 2004, Kenneth Jr. changed his plea to guilty and implicated his mother in Kasdan's murder. While some say he did it because he was no longer under his mother's thumb, I see it as yet another way Sante manipulated him. It was done as part of a plea deal that would take the death penalty off the table for Sante, should she be convicted. This plea deal had Sante written all over it, if you ask me. Anyway, during the trial, Ken testified that he shot Kasdan in the back of the head at close range and recruited someone at a homeless shelter to help him dispose of the body. He also confessed to killing the Bahamian banker Syed Bilal Ahmed by first drugging him, then drowning him in a bathtub, and later disposing of the body in the ocean. Sante again resorted to doing whatever she could to prolong the trial. Her court appearances including arrivals via wheelchair, fainting spells, a heart attack, and continuous weeping. The judge, Kathleen Kennedy Powell, didn't buy any of it, particularly after Sante took to name-calling and repeatedly calling the prosecutor Mr. D.A. Death. After she hopped on her soapbox to make a prolonged blah 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 statement, denying the murders and accusing police and prosecutors of all kinds of misconduct, the judge ordered her to sit down and shut up before calling her one of the most evil individuals she had ever encountered during her time on the bench. Sante and Ken were sentenced to life in prison for the death of David Kasdan. California and New York agreed that Sante could return to New York to serve her sentences, and, as part of his plea agreement, Ken was allowed to stay in California. Sante was incarcerated at the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women in New York. She was 10 years into her life sentence plus 125 years when on May 19, 2014, Sante kicked the bucket, apparently from natural causes. And there you have it, kids, the wild ride that was the life of Sante Kimes and her equally unhinged son, Kenny Jr. If this isn't the kind of story that leaves you questioning how people like this even exist, I don't know what will. From cons, scams, arson, and murder to a life lived like a poorly written soap opera, Sante really took off her rocker to new heights, or lows, depending on how you look at it. It's honestly hard to believe that this wasn't all part of some sort of bizarre true crime fiction. But no, these two really did the most, and then some. Just remember, folks, when your mom gets on your nerves, at least she's probably not trying to rope you into a life of crime. So that's something to be thankful for, right? Well, thanks for sticking around for this doozy. Stud and I really appreciate you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Because hey, all of this makes your family look normal. TTFN, ta-ta for now.